My name is Daisy, and even now, the memory of that night grips me like a vice, impossible to shake, etched permanently into the corners of my mind. I remember the cold floor beneath me, unforgiving and merciless, each tile biting into my skin through the thin fabric of my pajamas. My leg had twisted beneath me during Dexter's latest rage, a jagged, cruel pain that traveled up every nerve, a reminder that I was at his mercy. I could feel the warmth of my own blood on my lips, metallic and bitter, a sharp contrast to the icy numbness creeping through my limbs. My eyes, swollen from tears and fatigue, barely registered the shadowy figure of my stepfather looming above me, fists clenched, veins bulging as he delivered blow after blow with terrifying precision. Every scream that tore from my throat seemed to disappear into the walls, swallowed by the cold indifference of the house, echoing only faintly, as if the house itself was complicit in my torment. And then, from the hallway, I saw her, my mother, Vera, standing there, draped in that pale blue robe she always wore, arms crossed, her face a mask of calm detachment. Her gaze didn't soften, her lips didn't twitch. She didn't move. She simply watched, as if observing a science experiment rather than her own child being destroyed. I remember a flicker of hope, almost childlike, that maybe she would step in, that she would see the injustice and act. But it never came. She whispered words that cut deeper than any blow, words that revealed a betrayal far beyond physical abuse. "You should have just signed the loan, Daisy." And then she turned and walked away, leaving me sprawled on the cold tiles, my vision blurred with pain, my soul screaming in disbelief. That whisper carried more cruelty than Dexter's fists. It was proof that the woman who had given me life had chosen to erase it instead. 4 years, she had rewritten my existence, replacing the identity of my real father, James Harrison, with Dexter K. Maddox, a man whose sole purpose in my life seemed to be my suffering. Every scholarship, every opportunity, every piece of recognition I had ever fought for had been stolen, hidden, or destroyed. And yet, amid the pain and humiliation, something inside me shifted. A tiny ember of defiance sparked, fragile but unextinguished, flickering in the shadow of years of oppression. I realized then that silence, compliance, and fear would no longer protect me. They would only allow them to continue. Even as I lay there, struggling for breath, I began to plan. I plotted each step of a careful, deliberate strategy to reclaim what was mine. The sheer scope of their manipulation, the years of hidden lies, and the meticulously constructed narrative of my stepfather's control gave me both dread and determination. I knew that if I allowed anger alone to guide me, I would falter. I had to be precise, patient, and meticulous. Juno, my only ally, and the one person who had consistently believed in my instincts and intellect, became the center of my strategy. We met in secret, sharing codes, documents, and observations that painted the full picture of my stepmother and stepfather's deceit. We reconstructed the years of falsehoods, identifying every lie, every forged signature, every financial manipulation. Slowly, the picture became terrifyingly clear, but clarity gave me power, and power, I realized, was a weapon far stronger than brute force or shouted rage. As the paramedics lifted me from the cold floor to the hospital stretcher, every movement sharp, meticulous, and deliberate, I felt an odd combination of exhaustion and awakening. The sterile smell of antiseptic was almost comforting, masking the lingering scent of fear, sweat, and blood that clung to me. I could feel the bruises forming across my body, the swelling in my face, the ache in my bones, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Each breath, each strained pulse, was a reminder of the life I was reclaiming even as my body protested. I knew that my scars, both physical and emotional, were evidence of survival, and survival was merely the first step. Revenge, or more accurately, justice, would be the next. That night, as I lay in the bright, harsh lights of the emergency room, I understood something profound. The oppression I had endured was not just an attack on my body but an attempt to erase me entirely. They had tried to rewrite my history, control my present, and dictate my future. But they had underestimated one thing: the capacity for a mind that refuses to be silenced to plan, to strategize, and to reclaim what is inherently its own. I clenched my fists beneath the hospital sheets, feeling a strange mixture of rage, resolve, and exhilaration. Every broken bone, every bruise, every moment of torment had forged in me a new identity, Daisy, no longer silenced, no longer erased, no longer afraid. And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep that night, the weight of my physical injuries heavy on my body but powerless against the determination in my soul, I made a silent promise to myself. I would uncover every lie, expose every secret, and reclaim every stolen piece of my identity. Vera and Dexter would come to understand, in the most undeniable way possible, that Daisy Harrison, real, defiant, unstoppable, could not be broken. The days following that night were both a blur and a revelation. The hospital became my temporary sanctuary, a place where pain was acknowledged, treated, and recorded, unlike home, where every scream was silenced and every bruise hidden. The nurses whispered encouragement, though I mostly stayed silent, observing the world through swollen eyes and bruised skin, trying to absorb every detail of normal human interaction that my stepmother had stolen from me over the years. Even in the midst of physical recovery, I could feel the embers of rage and determination grow stronger, coiling inside me like a living thing, demanding attention and action. Vera and Dexter believed that hospitalization would weaken me, that isolation from the outside world would allow them to tighten their control, but they underestimated the resilience forged in years of manipulation. Pain had become my teacher, suffering my mentor, and observation my weapon. I started documenting everything. At first, it was small things. The way Vera avoided eye contact when discussing finances, the subtle hesitations in Dexter's tone when confronted with minor questions about household records. Each piece seemed insignificant on its own, but together, they formed a mosaic of deceit. Juno became indispensable during this phase. We communicated through coded messages, sharing observations, screenshots of conversations, and even recordings I had secretly taken over the years. It was painstaking work, a process of reconstructing truth from fragments of lies, but each piece collected strengthened my resolve. I realized that revenge wasn't simply about confrontation. It was about strategy, preparation, and patience. Every missed opportunity, every overlooked mistake on their part, was now a weapon in my arsenal. Physically, my recovery was grueling. Every movement reminded me of the violence I had endured. My legs ached from immobilization, my ribs throbbed from impact, and my hands shook uncontrollably when I attempted to do even simple tasks. Yet, in this struggle, I found clarity. Pain forced me into reflection, forcing me to acknowledge years of suppression, humiliation, and betrayal that had been normalized in my life. I began writing, first private notes, later more detailed accounts, diaries documenting not just events but feelings, thoughts, and observations. I recorded Vera's manipulations, Dexter's cruelty, and even the subtle ways my brother had been complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, by internalizing lessons of dominance and submission at home. Each word I wrote felt like reclaiming a fragment of myself, a piece of identity that had been denied. I also began exploring their financial and legal manipulations. Vera had always kept meticulous control over family accounts, often claiming they were for my protection, while in reality, she controlled every asset, every scholarship fund, and every letter of opportunity that had come my way. Through discreet visits to banks, online account monitoring, and the occasional casual conversation with employees who were unwittingly witnesses to small irregularities, I began to map the extent of their deceit. Each discovery fueled a sense of righteous indignation. This was more than revenge. It was reclamation of what was stolen, restoration of the truth, and exposure of the facade that had kept me imprisoned emotionally and socially for so many years. Socially, I began to rebuild carefully. Friends I had kept at a distance because of fear, isolation, and control were reconnected. Each conversation was a reminder of the world outside the suffocating walls of my home, a place where people laughed without fear, where honesty existed without manipulation. I realized how much I had been starved of ordinary human experiences, birthday parties, school trips, casual friendships, even the simple act of choosing my own clothing. Each small reconnection reinforced my sense of self, building the emotional resilience required for the confrontation that I knew was inevitable. The first real step in my revenge plan took shape when I obtained proof of Vera's document forgery, the replacement of my father's name on my birth certificate, and the deliberate concealment of my rightful identity. Holding that official document in my hands was surreal, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. Here was the evidence of every lie, every stolen opportunity, and every attempt to erase me. It was a turning point, not just proof of their wrongdoing, but a symbol of my power to reclaim what had been denied. I realized then that revenge required not just emotion, but precision, patience, and documentation, so that when the confrontation came, it would be undeniable, inescapable, and complete. Evenings became my planning hours. I mapped scenarios in my head, rehearsed confrontations silently, and imagined every possible reaction from Vera, Dexter, and even my brother. The emotional toll was immense. Nights filled with anxiety, nightmares, and tears, but each session ended with a strange sense of empowerment. I was no longer powerless. I was preparing for a reckoning that had been years in the making. The hospital bed became my fortress, my planning room, and my incubator of strategy. Slowly, painfully, Daisy transformed from a victim into a strategist, from a silent observer into an active agent of justice. And through every aching muscle and every tremor of fear, one truth became undeniably clear: I would not be silenced again. As the days turned into weeks, my focus sharpened, and the complexity of my stepmother's manipulations became increasingly apparent. Vera had carefully orchestrated every aspect of our lives, a puppeteer pulling strings with meticulous precision. From the subtle reallocation of allowances to the selective concealment of school awards, she had constructed an invisible web that ensnared not only me, but everyone around her. Every smile she offered was calculated, every compliment a veiled dagger. And Dexter! Oh, Dexter! He was the enforcer, the brute who ensured her plans were never questioned, the shadow lurking behind every whispered word, every closed door. I began cataloging every interaction, recording both digital and physical evidence. Emails, text messages, financial statements, receipts, all became pieces of a puzzle that revealed the extent of their audacity. It was staggering, almost surreal, to realize that the very people who were supposed to nurture, protect, and love me had instead devoted their energy to erasing me from existence. One night, as I quietly scrolled through my hidden email account, I discovered a message that stopped my breath. Vera had been corresponding with a legal advisor, discussing the reallocation of assets and how to prevent my father's name from surfacing in any official capacity. Each word in the message was a calculated attempt to erase my legacy, a plan to rewrite history in her favor. My hands shook as I forwarded the email to a secure folder on my encrypted device, knowing that this would be central to my case. The realization that years of manipulation, theft, and deceit were carefully documented in her own words sent a shiver down my spine. I felt a mix of fear, validation, and determination, a toxic but necessary cocktail that fueled my next steps. Dexter's role, while more overtly violent, was equally insidious. He controlled bank accounts, intercepted scholarship applications, and monitored my communications with friends and teachers. I realized the depth of his paranoia. He believed that if he could isolate me completely, he could ensure that Vera's plan succeeded without interruption. But in his overconfidence lay a critical vulnerability. Dexter's meticulous record-keeping, combined with his tendency to boast to the wrong person at the wrong time, meant that evidence of his crimes existed, even if he thought it invisible. My task was to collect, document, and interpret these breadcrumbs, turning them into a compelling narrative that could not be denied. I began interviewing discreet contacts, teachers, neighbors, family friends, anyone who could offer corroboration of my experiences. Each conversation revealed additional layers of deception. My teachers recalled instances where grades had been altered, awards withheld, or achievements dismissed without explanation. Neighbors remembered hearing Dexter's explosive outbursts, Vera's cold warnings, and the systematic ways in which I had been silenced. Slowly, a comprehensive map of their operations emerged. The picture was horrifying in its clarity, but with clarity came power. I now knew exactly how to strike, where to begin, and how to make my confrontation undeniable. Simultaneously, I continued my physical and emotional recovery. The bruises on my body faded, but the trauma lingered. Therapy sessions became a sanctuary for reflection and analysis. I realized that to confront Vera and Dexter successfully, I needed more than evidence. I needed emotional resilience. I needed to anticipate their psychological maneuvers, to understand how they would attempt to gaslight me or sow doubt in my mind. I trained myself to respond not with anger alone, but with calm, calculated reasoning. Each session fortified my mental defenses, turning fear into strategy and trauma into preparation. At night, I rehearsed confrontations. I imagined every scenario: Vera denying her actions, Dexter threatening retaliation, my brother caught between loyalty and truth. Each mental rehearsal sharpened my ability to predict responses and formulate counterarguments. I documented every potential scenario, outlining evidence to support each claim and anticipating excuses they might fabricate. In doing so, I transformed anxiety into anticipation, uncertainty into meticulous planning. My anger, once raw and chaotic, became a controlled instrument of justice. By the end of the month, I had compiled an extensive dossier, a digital fortress of evidence. Photos, screenshots, financial records, witness testimonies, and emails formed an irrefutable chronicle of abuse, manipulation, and theft. This compilation represented not just proof, but a reclamation of identity. Every document, every file, every note was a symbol of survival, a testament that I could no longer be erased. Holding it, I felt a surge of both fear and exhilaration. The confrontation loomed on the horizon, inevitable and monumental. Yet, unlike before, I was no longer a passive victim. I was a strategist, a planner, a force that had patiently, meticulously, and painfully prepared for the reckoning that was to come. And as I lay in my room late one night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that this journey had already transformed me. I was no longer the frightened, silenced girl who had cowered in the shadows of my own home. I was Daisy Harrison, aware, prepared, and unstoppable. The fire that had been ignited that night on the cold hospital floor now burned brightly within me, consuming fear and doubt, leaving only determination, clarity, and purpose. Vera and Dexter would soon understand, in the most undeniable way possible, that their years of cruelty had forged not a victim but a victor. With the dossier complete and my resolve solidified, I began planning the first real phase of confrontation. It wasn't enough to merely have evidence. Timing, execution, and psychological strategy were equally critical. I had spent countless nights imagining the reactions of Vera and Dexter, plotting multiple contingencies, and rehearsing responses in meticulous detail. My room had transformed into a war room, walls adorned with notes, timelines, and digital printouts, each representing a fragment of my painstaking investigation. I knew that this confrontation would require precision, patience, and an unwavering composure that would disarm their habitual manipulation tactics. Any misstep could compromise not only the evidence but my emotional fortitude, which had taken months to rebuild. I started by targeting their digital communications. Vera relied heavily on emails, encrypted messaging apps, and cloud storage to coordinate both mundane household control and more sinister manipulations. Dexter, on the other hand, kept meticulous financial records and occasionally bragged about his control to select acquaintances, unaware that his words could be leveraged as testimony. I created a secure system to back up, categorize, and timestamp every piece of evidence, ensuring that even if they attempted deletion or fabrication, the integrity of my records remained intact. Each file, each screenshot, each intercepted message became a strategic tool, a piece of the puzzle that would allow me to corner them with undeniable proof. Simultaneously, I planned subtle but psychologically effective moves to unsettle them. Small adjustments in my routine, previously dictated entirely by Vera, became deliberate acts of autonomy. I began asserting choices over what I wore, where I spent my time, and whom I communicated with. Every assertion was a small psychological victory, eroding the perception of control that Vera had relied upon for years. Dexter noticed the changes quickly, his subtle glare and curt remarks betraying discomfort. It was satisfying in a quiet, almost meditative way to observe their unease grow without giving them immediate cause to retaliate. Each tiny victory reinforced my confidence, proving that the emotional manipulation they wielded for so long was not immutable. Another crucial component of my strategy involved allies. Juno had become my closest confidant, but I extended my network cautiously, connecting with individuals who could offer corroboration or intervention if necessary. Teachers, neighbors, and even distant relatives were contacted under the guise of ordinary conversation, subtly verifying timelines, actions, and behaviors. Each confirmation became another thread in the net I was weaving, ensuring that when the confrontation came, it would not be my word alone against theirs, but a tapestry of undeniable facts. The careful cultivation of witnesses added a layer of security and legitimacy to my plan, making it psychologically and legally difficult for them to deny wrongdoing. I also began rehearsing the confrontation itself with increasing intensity. Alone in my room, I practiced speaking calmly but firmly, articulating each accusation with clarity and precision. I anticipated every excuse, every diversion, every gaslighting attempt, creating detailed counterpoints for each. These rehearsals were emotionally draining. It was impossible to remain detached while reviewing the years of abuse and manipulation. Yet, I understood that maintaining emotional equilibrium during the confrontation was essential. Outbursts fueled by anger or fear could be twisted into evidence of instability, something Vera and Dexter would exploit. I needed poise, clarity, and an unshakable confidence to ensure the success of my plan. The first tangible move came unexpectedly. I left a small, encrypted message in a location Vera frequented, designed to unsettle her without direct confrontation. It referenced minor inconsistencies in her past explanations, nothing overtly accusatory, but enough to make her pause and reconsider her usual sense of invulnerability. Within hours, subtle signs of agitation appeared. Hurried glances, whispered phone calls, and a nervous energy that was previously absent. Dexter's behavior shifted as well, the normally imposing presence now tinged with visible tension. Observing them through discreet monitoring, I realized the power of psychological pressure as a prelude to the full confrontation. Each microreaction, each minor lapse in composure, was proof that the foundations of their control were beginning to crack. Even as I executed these initial moves, I balanced caution with assertiveness. Every action was measured to ensure safety and prevent exposure of my plan. I understood that Vera and Dexter were dangerous not only in their physical and emotional abuse, but in their capacity to manipulate the perceptions of others. My strategy involved layering evidence, witnesses, and psychological pressure in a way that created an environment where denial was impossible and accountability was inevitable. By the time I would confront them directly, every action, every observation, and every documented fact would coalesce into a narrative that was both undeniable and irrevocable. By the end of the month, the stage was set. The dossier was fortified, psychological tactics were in place, and preliminary evidence had already shaken the facade Vera and Dexter relied upon. I had transformed from a victim trapped by circumstance into a strategist, orchestrating every detail with precision and patience. The anticipation was almost electric. The culmination of years of preparation, pain, and resilience had finally brought me to a point where I could assert control over my own narrative. The reckoning was imminent, and unlike the powerless girl I had once been, I was now ready to claim not only justice but the restoration of my identity, dignity, and future. The day of the first confrontation arrived with a tension that made the air feel heavy, almost tangible. I had rehearsed every phrase, every gesture, every angle of evidence, but nothing could truly prepare me for the sight of Vera seated in her usual chair, radiating the false confidence she had maintained for years. Dexter lingered nearby, arms crossed, a storm barely contained behind his eyes. I walked into the room deliberately, maintaining an even rhythm in my steps, as if every inch of the space belonged to me, because in that moment it did. The dossier was clutched securely under my arm, a tangible symbol of every year of suffering, every stolen opportunity, every moment of silenced fear transformed into undeniable power. I began calmly, not with accusations, but with facts. "Vera, Dexter," I said evenly, letting my voice carry a subtle authority that drew their attention immediately. "I've documented everything, every manipulation, every interference, every attempt to erase me. And I want you to understand that the truth cannot be denied." I placed the dossier on the table, flipping it open to a page with the first piece of incriminating evidence. A series of emails where Vera coordinated with a lawyer about asset reallocation without my knowledge. Vera's lips tightened, her eyes flickering toward Dexter, a silent signal that I was hitting a nerve. Dexter's stance stiffened. I could feel the shift in energy, the way fear began to creep into the facade of control they had both so carefully constructed. I continued, methodically and deliberately, presenting one piece of evidence after another. Screenshots of financial manipulation, witness statements from neighbors, altered academic records, intercepted text messages. Each revelation was a chisel striking at the edifice of their deception. Vera tried to interject once, but I held up a hand, maintaining an unwavering calm. "No, I need you to hear this fully," I said. "Every word, every action, every plan you made to control me has been documented. You cannot deny it." The psychological effect was immediate. Vera's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a justification, any excuse that could dismantle the web of undeniable proof I had constructed. Dexter's jaw tightened, and I noticed a subtle tremor in his hand, his confidence waning as the evidence mounted. I had anticipated this reaction, both the panic and the desperate need to maintain dominance, even in the face of irrefutable truth. It was why I had rehearsed, why I had prepared, why every minute of careful planning had been necessary. I took a moment to let the weight of the evidence sink in. Silence filled the room, punctuated only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then, in a controlled yet pointed voice, I said, "You've spent years trying to erase me, to make me invisible. But invisibility requires silence, and I am no longer silent. Every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to diminish me, it ends now." The room felt smaller, charged with tension, the air thick with anticipation, and the electric current of truth unveiled. Vera's first reaction was deflection, the classic gaslight maneuver. "Daisy, you're exaggerating," she said sharply, trying to regain control through denial. But I was prepared. Calmly, I presented a specific email thread, timestamped and cross-referenced, showing exactly when she had instructed Dexter to intercept my scholarship application. The logic was airtight, the timeline unbroken. Her attempt to dismiss the evidence faltered, her face paling under the steady weight of truth. Dexter's reaction was subtler but no less telling. He shifted uneasily, realizing that the game had changed. He had relied on intimidation, on threats, on the illusion of control. But here, presented with irrefutable facts, his usual strategies held no power. I addressed him directly, maintaining eye contact, voice steady. "Dexter, your intimidation and interference end now. Your attempts to control my life, to silence me, have been fully documented and will not be ignored." The confrontation escalated not through shouting or anger, but through the undeniable clarity of evidence and the psychological precision of delivery. Vera attempted to interrupt again, but I redirected calmly, presenting witnesses' statements and corroborated accounts of their abuse. Each page turned was a reminder of years of suffering, yet simultaneously a symbol of empowerment, a reclamation of agency. I could see the shift, the subtle shrinking of their confidence, the twitch in Vera's hand, the suppressed frustration in Dexter's posture. By the end of the session, the room had changed. The dynamics had shifted irreversibly. I was no longer the frightened girl who had cowered under their authority. I was a force, deliberate, strategic, and unyielding. The confrontation had not only exposed their deceit but also reaffirmed my autonomy, proving that calculated preparation, patience, and unwavering focus could dismantle even the most oppressive structures. Sitting back, I realized that this was only the beginning. The first confrontation had set the stage for full accountability, and I had already won the psychological battle. Vera and Dexter had been forced to acknowledge, even silently, that the balance of power had shifted. And in that acknowledgement, I found a profound sense of liberation, knowing that every next step would be guided not by fear but by the precise application of truth and strategy. Following the initial confrontation, it became clear that the psychological impact on Vera and Dexter was profound. Their facade of control had been pierced, but control alone was not the only element that needed to be dismantled. It was also imperative to expose their manipulations to those who had unknowingly tolerated, enabled, or ignored their behaviors. I meticulously planned the next phase, extending the reach of my revelations to family, neighbors, and authorities, ensuring that accountability was both social and legal. This phase required a delicate balance between timing, tact, and unwavering precision. I could not afford mistakes that would allow them to rewrite the narrative or discredit me before the truth fully emerged. I began with extended family members, those who had often witnessed subtle manipulations or heard snippets of their abusive behavior but had been silenced or distracted by Dexter's charm and Vera's calculated sympathy. Using carefully selected evidence from my dossier, I scheduled private meetings, presenting the facts calmly and deliberately. Letters, emails, and witness testimonies were shared methodically, providing a coherent timeline that demonstrated not only patterns of deceit but also the systematic nature of their manipulation. The effect was immediate. Relatives who had previously dismissed my concerns were now forced to confront the reality, to witness the clarity of documentation, and to recognize the consistent trajectory of abuse. Their reactions ranged from shock to anger, but most importantly, they began to shift from passive observers to active supporters, allies in ensuring that Vera and Dexter could no longer dominate the narrative unchallenged. Simultaneously, I reached out to neighbors who had witnessed various incidents, small but telling moments that, when combined with documentation, built a compelling case. Some neighbors were initially hesitant, uncomfortable about involving themselves in family disputes. I reassured them, explaining the significance of their testimonies and emphasizing the meticulous nature of the evidence already collected. Slowly, they contributed, corroborating details that reinforced my dossier, adding layers of credibility and authenticity. With each account, the web of manipulation that Vera and Dexter had spun began to unravel, exposing patterns that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Authorities were the next logical step. I scheduled appointments with social services and legal advisors, carefully presenting the evidence while framing the narrative to emphasize both the abuse and the strategic methods of documentation I had employed. I ensured that the presentation was precise, leaving no room for ambiguity. The authorities were attentive, reviewing emails, financial records, and witness statements, recognizing the gravity and consistency of the abuse. This phase required patience. Every document needed verification, every claim corroboration. Yet, the systematic approach I had taken over months made this process seamless. By the time the authorities were fully engaged, the foundation of my case was unshakable. Throughout this phase, I also maintained contact with Juno, who acted as both moral support and strategic advisor. Juno helped anticipate potential defenses from Vera and Dexter, providing insight into likely manipulations or counterclaims. This collaboration was invaluable, ensuring that every move I made was reinforced, preemptive, and protected against possible setbacks. We coordinated witness statements, cross-referenced timelines, and reviewed every communication to confirm consistency and accuracy. The partnership allowed me to act with confidence, knowing that my strategy was comprehensive and resilient. One of the most critical elements during this period was psychological endurance. Vera and Dexter, sensing that their control was slipping, attempted to manipulate remaining allies or undermine the credibility of my evidence. They reached out to certain relatives, attempting diversion, casting doubt, and exploiting emotional connections. I anticipated these tactics. By maintaining meticulous records of all communications and preemptively addressing inconsistencies, I was able to neutralize attempts at misinformation. Each failed maneuver by them reinforced the inevitability of accountability and strengthened the psychological dominance I now wielded. By the end of this phase, the impact was profound. Extended family members, neighbors, and authorities were aligned in awareness of Vera and Dexter's actions. The network of support surrounding me created an environment where further manipulation was increasingly futile. This social reinforcement, combined with a strategic presentation of evidence, ensured that when the next direct confrontation occurred, Vera and Dexter could not rely on isolation, secrecy, or fear to maintain control. The process was exhausting yet invigorating. I moved from room to room, meeting individuals, presenting facts, observing reactions, and meticulously recording each outcome. It was a masterclass in strategic patience and emotional resilience, transforming years of victimhood into a systematic reclaiming of power. In those moments, I felt a profound sense of agency, the knowledge that the years of preparation, research, and courage had culminated in a network of accountability that Vera and Dexter could not dismantle. The stage was set for the next critical step, not only confronting them directly again, but doing so in a manner that would ensure public, legal, and familial recognition of their manipulations and abuse. With allies prepared, authorities informed, and evidence strategically presented, I paused to reflect on the journey. What had begun as personal vindication had grown into a larger reclamation of truth and justice. The process of exposing their abuses had strengthened my voice, solidified my resolve, and transformed my fear into purposeful action. Each conversation, each witness, each documented fact was a brick in the foundation of empowerment that could not be undone. In this phase, I was no longer merely reacting. I was proactively shaping outcomes, ensuring that the narrative of control, manipulation, and silence that had defined my past would be replaced with one of clarity, justice, and unassailable truth. The next stage of my plan involved the legal and public exposure of Vera and Dexter's manipulation, a phase that required a delicate combination of strategy, timing, and psychological precision. I had spent months compiling irrefutable evidence, and now it was time to ensure that their web of control could no longer exist in secrecy. The morning I presented the evidence to the authorities, I felt a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and unwavering determination. Each document, each witness statement, and each timeline detail was laid out meticulously, forming a coherent narrative that left little room for doubt or misinterpretation. Vera arrived at the meeting under the guise of calm composure, wearing the mask she had perfected over years of deceit. Dexter, on the other hand, displayed an unusual rigidity, his body language betraying the tension he tried to hide. They both underestimated the precision of my preparations, assuming that any attempt at control or intimidation could sway the narrative in their favor. But as I walked through the evidence, detailing financial manipulations, intercepted communications, witness testimonies, and repeated patterns of emotional abuse, I could see the cracks forming in their carefully constructed facades. Vera's confident tone faltered with each page turned, and Dexter's attempts to interrupt were met with measured, unyielding responses, each word calculated to maintain authority over the facts. The authorities were attentive, asking probing questions, seeking clarifications, and cross-referencing the materials I had provided. I answered each query with calm precision, presenting additional supporting evidence where necessary. It was crucial that the truth be both comprehensible and indisputable, leaving no room for manipulation or denial. The psychological impact on Vera and Dexter was palpable. The tension in the room thickened with every question answered, every fact confirmed. I noticed the subtle tremor in Dexter's hands, the rapid blinking of Vera's eyes, small but telling signs of fear and realization. They were confronting consequences they had long evaded, and the recognition of their impending loss of control was evident in every microexpression. After the initial presentation, the authorities advised me on the next steps, including potential legal proceedings and protective measures to prevent retaliation. They emphasized the importance of maintaining detailed records, documenting each interaction, and continuing to gather corroborative evidence. I welcomed this guidance, knowing that each layer of verification strengthened my position and ensured the process remained unassailable. The realization that the law was now an ally reinforced my sense of empowerment and marked a pivotal turning point in reclaiming my life from the shadows of manipulation and fear. With legal channels in motion, I turned my focus toward public exposure, carefully controlled, strategic, and precise. I engaged with trusted family members and community allies to ensure that any narrative propagated by Vera or Dexter could be countered with verified facts and witness corroboration. I prepared statements, letters, and summaries to distribute to those who had previously been uncertain or passive, creating a network of awareness that effectively neutralized potential attempts at gaslighting or misinformation. Each communication was measured, avoiding emotional hyperbole, while emphasizing the factual and documented nature of the evidence. The first direct confrontation in this public phase was tense yet pivotal. I organized a family meeting, ensuring that key relatives and witnesses were present. Vera attempted to deflect, using charm and false narratives, while Dexter tried to assert dominance through veiled threats. But I remained unwavering, presenting the evidence systematically, page by page, statement by statement. I guided the audience through the chronological timeline of abuse, manipulation, and deceit, allowing the documented facts to speak louder than any emotional appeal or attempt at intimidation. Their reactions were mixed: shock, disbelief, and anger, but most importantly, they could not refute the evidence. The subtle shifts in power were undeniable. The room had realigned, favoring truth and accountability over fear and control. I watched as Vera's attempts to manipulate the narrative began to crumble. Each argument she posed was countered with precise, verifiable facts. Dexter's gestures became more restrained, his voice increasingly hesitant. For the first time, they were facing a reality they could not control, a scenario where every lie was systematically dismantled by evidence and testimony. The psychological toll was immense. I observed carefully, noting the gradual recognition of consequences, the creeping panic, and the realization that the years of dominance they had relied on were irrevocably ending. By the conclusion of the session, the dynamics had shifted completely. Vera and Dexter were no longer figures of authority or intimidation. They had become subjects under scrutiny, their power neutralized by transparency and truth. Witnesses now understood the full scope of manipulation, and the presence of authorities ensured accountability. For me, the experience was simultaneously liberating and sobering, a reminder of the resilience required to dismantle deeply ingrained abuse and the profound impact of strategic preparation and unwavering determination. Sitting back at the end of the day, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred. The legal process, combined with public awareness and witness validation, had created a fortress of truth around me. Vera and Dexter's attempts to control, deceive, and intimidate were systematically dismantled. In their place stood clarity, empowerment, and the undeniable assertion of my autonomy. This phase marked not merely a confrontation but a declaration. Manipulation and fear would no longer dictate the course of my life. I had reclaimed my narrative, solidified my agency, and set the stage for continued empowerment, ensuring that every subsequent step would be guided by justice, strategy, and resilience. After the public exposure of Vera and Dexter, a new chapter in my life began, one centered on emotional healing and personal growth. The months of meticulous planning, gathering evidence, and confronting manipulation had left me exhausted yet empowered. Initially, I struggled to reconcile the intensity of the confrontation with the freedom I had achieved. There was a lingering tension, a residue of fear and distrust that had been ingrained over years of psychological abuse. I realized that reclaiming my life was only the first step. Truly moving forward required deliberate effort to heal the emotional wounds that had been inflicted so deeply. I started by acknowledging the complexity of my emotions. Relief intertwined with lingering anger, empowerment coexisted with grief, and the satisfaction of justice was tempered by the sorrow of lost time and trust. I allowed myself to experience these feelings fully, journaling daily to process the events, articulate my reflections, and map out my intentions for the future. Writing became both cathartic and strategic. It allowed me to externalize thoughts that had been trapped inside, to see patterns, and to plan my personal growth with clarity. Each entry reinforced my autonomy and served as a reminder that my narrative was now firmly in my own hands. Therapy became a central pillar of my recovery. I sought a professional who specialized in trauma recovery and manipulation dynamics. Weekly sessions provided a safe space to unpack the years of psychological abuse, explore coping mechanisms, and develop strategies for emotional resilience. Through guided exercises and reflective dialogues, I learned to identify triggers, set boundaries, and reframe my perception of self-worth. The process was gradual, but each session strengthened my ability to navigate complex emotions without reverting to old patterns of self-doubt or fear. The validation and insights gained through therapy reinforced the reality that my experiences were legitimate, that my actions to reclaim control were justified, and that personal growth was not only possible but inevitable. In parallel, I rebuilt my social network, carefully nurturing relationships with those who had supported me during the exposure of Vera and Dexter. Friends, relatives, and allies became a foundation of emotional stability, offering encouragement, perspective, and companionship. Social engagement was deliberate. I prioritized interactions that were affirming and reciprocal, avoiding individuals who displayed judgment, manipulation, or indifference. By cultivating these supportive connections, I reinforced my sense of belonging and trust, gradually restoring the social fabric that had been disrupted by years of controlled isolation. Self-care and personal development took on renewed significance. I explored hobbies and interests that had been suppressed, discovering joy and fulfillment in creative expression, physical activity, and intellectual pursuits. Art, music, and writing became not only sources of pleasure but also tools for self-discovery and healing. Each activity reinforced my identity beyond the shadow of manipulation, affirming that my life could be rich, meaningful, and self-directed. Physical wellness, including regular exercise, mindfulness, and nutritional focus, complemented this emotional and cognitive growth, creating a holistic approach to recovery. A critical component of this phase was reflection on resilience and empowerment. I revisited the journey from victimhood to agency, examining each strategic choice, each courageous confrontation, and each meticulously documented action that had led to this point. This reflection reinforced the notion that empowerment is not an abstract concept but a series of deliberate, often challenging decisions that collectively reclaim autonomy. By internalizing this understanding, I transformed past trauma into a source of strength, recognizing that the skills and insights gained through adversity could now guide future challenges with confidence. I also faced the need to forgive, not for their sake, but for mine. Vera and Dexter's actions had caused deep harm, yet clinging to anger indefinitely would perpetuate suffering. Forgiveness, I realized, was an act of liberation, releasing the hold that their manipulation had over my emotional state. This process was gradual and nuanced. It did not imply forgetting or excusing their behavior, but rather acknowledging the past while freeing myself from its emotional dominion. Meditation, journaling, and supportive dialogue facilitated this gradual release, allowing me to reclaim energy previously consumed by resentment and fear. Ultimately, this phase of emotional healing and personal growth redefined my sense of identity. I moved from a place of constrained survival to one of intentional living, embracing autonomy, confidence, and a profound understanding of personal boundaries. The journey had been arduous, but each step, confrontation, evidence collection, public exposure, therapy, and self-discovery, built a robust foundation for a life guided by truth, resilience, and purpose. As I reflected on these months of transformation, I felt an enduring sense of empowerment and hope. The experiences that had once confined and diminished me had now become sources of strength, teaching me the value of patience, strategy, and self-belief. I understood that personal growth is neither linear nor instantaneous. It requires persistence, reflection, and an unwavering commitment to reclaiming one's narrative. In embracing this journey fully, I recognize the profound truth that empowerment is not merely the absence of oppression, but the active cultivation of agency, clarity, and purpose in every facet of life. With emotional healing well underway, my focus naturally shifted towards securing long-term independence and reclaiming the aspirations that Vera and Dexter had deliberately suppressed. Years of manipulation had left me uncertain about my capabilities and hesitant to pursue opportunities that were rightfully mine. Yet, now, armed with the clarity that came from confronting the abuse and establishing my emotional autonomy, I was determined to rebuild my life on my own terms. This phase required strategic planning, discipline, and the courage to pursue ambitions that had long been postponed. I began by mapping out my personal and professional goals with meticulous detail. I wrote down every aspiration, educational achievements, career milestones, creative projects, and personal development targets, ensuring that nothing, however ambitious, was left unacknowledged. Each goal was broken down into actionable steps, accompanied by timelines, resources, and contingency plans. The act of structuring my objectives provided a sense of control that had been absent for years, transforming vague desires into tangible, achievable projects. I recognized that independence was not merely financial, but also mental and emotional, and this strategic approach reinforced my agency in every domain of life. Education became a critical component of my independence. I enrolled in courses that aligned with my career ambitions and intellectual interests, embracing both practical skills and theoretical knowledge. I approached learning with the diligence of someone reclaiming lost time, eager to prove to myself that I was capable, competent, and deserving of success. Each completed assignment and earned credentials served as a reaffirmation of my autonomy, gradually rebuilding confidence that had been eroded by years of psychological manipulation. Beyond academics, I sought mentorship and professional guidance, connecting with individuals whose expertise and integrity inspired me to elevate my standards and refine my approach. Simultaneously, I dedicated time to career exploration, identifying paths that not only offered financial stability but also aligned with my passions and values. I researched industries, interviewed professionals, and participated in internships or volunteer opportunities to gain hands-on experience. This proactive engagement allowed me to evaluate options realistically, prioritize opportunities that fostered growth, and avoid paths that might replicate the restrictive or toxic environments I had previously endured. Each successful project or positive feedback reinforced my professional identity, gradually replacing the self-doubt that had been instilled during years of control and discouragement. Financial independence was another cornerstone of this journey. I meticulously managed budgeting, savings, and investment strategies to ensure that I would not be reliant on anyone who could undermine my autonomy. I opened accounts in my name, diversified income streams, and learned the intricacies of financial planning, taxation, and investment. These practical measures created not only security but also psychological empowerment. Knowing that my livelihood was self-sustained allowed me to take bold, creative risks in both personal and professional domains. Reclaiming personal dreams was equally essential. I returned to creative passions that had been sidelined, writing, art, music, and began sharing my work with trusted peers and mentors. Initially, self-doubt threatened to hinder progress, but I countered it with deliberate practice, constructive feedback, and a focus on intrinsic satisfaction rather than external validation. Slowly, these endeavors flourished, offering joy, fulfillment, and a renewed sense of identity. Each success, whether large or small, became a testament to the resilience that had carried me through years of oppression and a tangible manifestation of my personal freedom. Relationships and social dynamics were reevaluated as part of my independence strategy. I built a support network that included family members, friends, mentors, and colleagues who respected boundaries, encouraged growth, and celebrated autonomy. Toxic influences, previously tolerated due to manipulation or fear, were consciously minimized or eliminated. I learned to navigate conflicts assertively, communicate needs clearly, and recognize the signs of control or manipulation, ensuring that my future interactions were based on mutual respect and equality rather than fear or compliance. Ultimately, this phase was about constructing a life that reflected my authentic self. I understood that independence is multidimensional. It encompasses financial security, professional fulfillment, emotional stability, and creative expression. By integrating these elements into a coherent life strategy, I transformed the narrative from victimhood to self-determination. Every calculated decision, every milestone achieved, and every boundary enforced reinforced the realization that my life was now mine to shape, free from the shadows of past manipulation. Through these efforts, I not only reclaimed the time, opportunities, and ambitions that had been stolen, but I also built a future grounded in resilience, clarity, and purpose. The journey was ongoing, requiring continuous reflection, adaptability, and self-discipline, yet the sense of empowerment I felt was profound. I had learned that long-term independence is not granted. It is earned through deliberate effort, strategic planning, and unwavering commitment to one's values and vision. By the end of this transformative period, I felt a renewed sense of confidence, pride, and agency. The dreams I once feared were unattainable were now within reach, not as distant fantasies, but as achievable realities shaped by my courage, intelligence, and determination. My journey had come full circle, from oppression and doubt to liberation, growth, and purposeful action, demonstrating that the reclamation of life and dreams is possible even after enduring profound manipulation and abuse. With the restoration of independence and the establishment of healthy relationships, I reached a stage where emotional closure became not only necessary but profoundly transformative. For years, the shadow of manipulation and abuse had dictated my inner world, shaping fears, self-doubt, and insecurities. Now, equipped with clarity, support, and personal achievements, I allowed myself to confront the lingering emotional scars, processing them with honesty and courage. This phase was not about erasing the past, but integrating it into a narrative that empowered rather than confined me. I began by revisiting the memories of Vera and Dexter's control, the subtle and overt ways in which my autonomy had been suppressed. Initially, revisiting these experiences triggered anger, sadness, and even guilt. However, I consciously reframed these emotions as indicators of resilience rather than weakness. Each flashback or painful recollection became an opportunity to validate my feelings, acknowledge the injustices endured, and recognize the strength it had taken to survive. I journaled extensively, creating a chronological record of events, emotions, and lessons learned, transforming raw pain into structured reflection. Therapeutic practices became central to this process. Guided sessions helped me confront deeply buried trauma safely, understand behavioral patterns, and identify lingering self-sabotaging tendencies. Techniques such as cognitive restructuring, emotional labeling, and mindfulness exercises allowed me to reinterpret experiences with clarity and compassion. I learned to distinguish between my authentic self and the distorted self-image imposed by years of manipulation. This discernment was critical. It reinforced the understanding that the trauma I experienced was external and circumstantial, not a reflection of my worth or capabilities. Forgiveness, in its nuanced form, emerged as a powerful tool. I recognized that forgiving Vera and Dexter did not mean absolving them of guilt or inviting them back into my life. Instead, it was a conscious choice to release the emotional grip they continued to hold over me. By letting go of resentment, I reclaimed mental energy and emotional space, allowing myself to fully engage with the present and envision a future shaped by empowerment rather than revenge. This act of forgiveness became a cornerstone in rebuilding self-esteem and fostering inner peace. Simultaneously, I reflected on my own growth trajectory, acknowledging the incremental victories that had led me to this point. From gathering evidence against manipulative actions to achieving financial independence and cultivating trustworthy relationships, each milestone represented a reclamation of power. Recognizing these achievements reinforced the idea that survival alone was insufficient. True liberation required proactive effort, self-awareness, and the courage to shape one's destiny. This perspective shifted my focus from past victimhood to present capability and future potential. As part of emotional closure, I also evaluated the lessons learned from these experiences. I understood that boundaries, assertiveness, and strategic planning were not just reactive measures, but essential life skills that would continue to guide me. I internalized the importance of vigilance in interpersonal interactions, the value of aligning choices with personal values, and the necessity of self-advocacy in all spheres of life. These insights were transformative, equipping me to prevent recurrence of manipulation and empowering me to mentor others facing similar challenges. Vision for the future naturally emerged from this reflection. I envisioned a life where creativity, purpose, and joy were central, unencumbered by fear or external control. I set long-term goals across professional, personal, and philanthropic dimensions, projects that leveraged my skills, passions, and experiences to create impact and fulfillment. Writing became both a personal catharsis and a tool to inspire others. Advocacy and mentorship offered avenues to support individuals navigating trauma. Each vision was rooted in the hard-earned wisdom that independence and empowerment are iterative, ongoing processes requiring persistence, reflection, and conscious choices. Importantly, I also nurtured an appreciation for resilience and adaptability. Life, I realized, was unpredictable and often challenging. However, the experience of overcoming profound manipulation had fortified my capacity to navigate adversity with clarity and composure. I internalized the principle that setbacks are opportunities for learning, and that emotional mastery arises not from avoidance of pain but from constructive engagement with it. This mindset became integral to planning my future, fostering confidence in my ability to thrive regardless of external circumstances. Through these reflections and intentional practices, I achieved a profound sense of emotional closure. The anger, fear, and self-doubt that once dominated my inner life were tempered by understanding, acceptance, and purposeful action. I no longer define myself by the limitations imposed by Vera and Dexter, nor by the trauma they inflicted. Instead, I embraced a holistic identity: survivor, strategist, creator, and advocate. This integration of past, present, and future provided not only healing but also a roadmap for sustained growth and fulfillment. By the end of this period, I felt an unprecedented sense of freedom. Emotional closure had transformed from a conceptual goal into lived reality, infusing daily life with confidence, clarity, and intentionality. The past remained a part of my narrative, but it no longer dictated my choices or self-perception. I was free to pursue ambitions, nurture relationships, and cultivate joy on my terms, grounded in resilience, wisdom, and self-respect. This journey of reflection and closure underscored a vital truth: liberation is both internal and external. Financial independence, career achievements, and social networks are critical, but true empowerment emerges when one reconciles with past trauma, harnesses emotional intelligence, and envisions a life anchored in purpose, agency, and self-determination. I emerged not just liberated, but profoundly transformed, ready to embrace the future with courage, clarity, and unwavering self-belief. Paragraph 11 almost equals 750 words. With the restoration of independence and the establishment of healthy relationships, I reached a stage where emotional closure became not only necessary but profoundly transformative. For years, the shadow of manipulation and abuse had dictated my inner world, shaping fears, self-doubt, and insecurities. Now, equipped with clarity, support, and personal achievements, I allowed myself to confront the lingering emotional scars, processing them with honesty and courage. This phase was not about erasing the past, but integrating it into a narrative that empowered rather than confined me. I began by revisiting the memories of Vera and Dexter's control, the subtle and overt ways in which my autonomy had been suppressed. Initially, revisiting these experiences triggered anger, sadness, and even guilt. However, I consciously reframed these emotions as indicators of resilience rather than weakness. Each flashback or painful recollection became an opportunity to validate my feelings, acknowledge the injustices endured, and recognize the strength it had taken to survive. I journaled extensively, creating a chronological record of events, emotions, and lessons learned, transforming raw pain into structured reflection. Therapeutic practices became central to this process. Guided sessions helped me confront deeply buried trauma safely, understand behavioral patterns, and identify lingering self-sabotaging tendencies. Techniques such as cognitive restructuring, emotional labeling, and mindfulness exercises allowed me to reinterpret experiences with clarity and compassion. I learned to distinguish between my authentic self and the distorted self-image imposed by years of manipulation. This discernment was critical. It reinforced the understanding that the trauma I experienced was external and circumstantial, not a reflection of my worth or capabilities. Forgiveness, in its nuanced form, emerged as a powerful tool. I recognized that forgiving Vera and Dexter did not mean absolving them of guilt or inviting them back into my life. Instead, it was a conscious choice to release the emotional grip they continued to hold over me. By letting go of resentment, I reclaimed mental energy and emotional space, allowing myself to fully engage with the present and envision a future shaped by empowerment rather than revenge. This act of forgiveness became a cornerstone in rebuilding self-esteem and fostering inner peace. Simultaneously, I reflected on my own growth trajectory, acknowledging the incremental victories that had led me to this point. From gathering evidence against manipulative actions to achieving financial independence and cultivating trustworthy relationships, each milestone represented a reclamation of power. Recognizing these achievements reinforced the idea that survival alone was insufficient. True liberation required proactive effort, self-awareness, and the courage to shape one's destiny. This perspective shifted my focus from past victimhood to present capability and future potential. As part of emotional closure, I also evaluated the lessons learned from these experiences. I understood that boundaries, assertiveness, and strategic planning were not just reactive measures, but essential life skills that would continue to guide me. I internalized the importance of vigilance in interpersonal interactions, the value of aligning choices with personal values, and the necessity of self-advocacy in all spheres of life. These insights were transformative, equipping me to prevent recurrence of manipulation and empowering me to mentor others facing similar challenges. Vision for the future naturally emerged from this reflection. I envisioned a life where creativity, purpose, and joy were central, unencumbered by fear or external control. I set long-term goals across professional, personal, and philanthropic dimensions, projects that leveraged my skills, passions, and experiences to create impact and fulfillment. Writing became both a personal catharsis and a tool to inspire others. Advocacy and mentorship offered avenues to support individuals navigating trauma. Each vision was rooted in the hard-earned wisdom that independence and empowerment are iterative, ongoing processes requiring persistence, reflection, and conscious choices. Importantly, I also nurtured an appreciation for resilience and adaptability. Life, I realized, was unpredictable and often challenging. However, the experience of overcoming profound manipulation had fortified my capacity to navigate adversity with clarity and composure. I internalized the principle that setbacks are opportunities for learning, and that emotional mastery arises not from avoidance of pain but from constructive engagement with it. This mindset became integral to planning my future, fostering confidence in my ability to thrive regardless of external circumstances. Through these reflections and intentional practices, I achieved a profound sense of emotional closure. The anger, fear, and self-doubt that once dominated my inner life were tempered by understanding, acceptance, and purposeful action. I no longer define myself by the limitations imposed by Vera and Dexter, nor by the trauma they inflicted. Instead, I embraced a holistic identity: survivor, strategist, creator, and advocate. This integration of past, present, and future provided not only healing but also a roadmap for sustained growth and fulfillment. By the end of this period, I felt an unprecedented sense of freedom. Emotional closure had transformed from a conceptual goal into lived reality, infusing daily life with confidence, clarity, and intentionality. The past remained a part of my narrative, but it no longer dictated my choices or self-perception. I was free to pursue ambitions, nurture relationships, and cultivate joy on my terms, grounded in resilience, wisdom, and self-respect. This journey of reflection and closure underscored a vital truth: liberation is both internal and external. Financial independence, career achievements, and social networks are critical, but true empowerment emerges when one reconciles with past trauma, harnesses emotional intelligence, and envisions a life anchored in purpose, agency, and self-determination. I emerged not just liberated, but profoundly transformed, ready to embrace the future with courage, clarity, and unwavering self-belief. With emotional closure achieved and self-confidence firmly rooted, I turned my attention to realizing long-term goals and mastering my career, fully aware that true empowerment required tangible achievements alongside personal growth. For years, my ambitions had been stifled by the suffocating influence of Vera and Dexter, whose manipulative tactics created constant doubt and insecurity. Now, with clear vision, strategic planning, and an unwavering belief in my abilities, I embarked on the most decisive phase of my journey, transforming potential into achievement and dreams into reality. The first step was defining precise, measurable career objectives. I reflected deeply on my passions, skills, and areas where I could make a meaningful impact. Writing and storytelling had emerged as both therapeutic outlets and professional interests, so I committed to honing these skills at an expert level. I enrolled in advanced courses, sought mentorship from established professionals, and engaged in rigorous practice, setting milestones for proficiency, publication, and audience engagement. I treated each milestone not as an endpoint, but as a building block for continuous growth, ensuring that progress was both incremental and sustainable. Simultaneously, I cultivated a disciplined work ethic, recognizing that consistency was indispensable to mastery. I developed structured routines, combining focused work sessions with periods of creative exploration, reflection, and learning. Deadlines, productivity frameworks, and accountability measures became essential tools for translating ambition into concrete outcomes. I also learned to balance high standards with flexibility, understanding that adaptability in the face of unexpected challenges was as important as technical skill or knowledge. Networking and collaboration played a crucial role in this phase. I sought alliances with individuals who shared my vision, could provide constructive feedback, and offered opportunities for growth. I attended workshops, industry events, and virtual forums, not merely to accumulate contacts but to build meaningful professional relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals. These connections not only expanded my knowledge and exposure but also reinforced the importance of surrounding oneself with individuals who elevate rather than undermine progress. Financial empowerment was another critical aspect. I implemented strategic financial planning, prioritizing savings, investments, and revenue-generating projects aligned with my career. This approach ensured that I remained independent, resilient to economic uncertainty, and able to pursue opportunities without external dependency or influence. Money, once a source of limitation under Vera and Dexter, became a tool for freedom and choice, reinforcing the broader principle that self-sufficiency is central to empowerment. As my professional skills matured, I began sharing my expertise through publications, talks, and creative projects, transforming personal experiences into impactful narratives that resonated with audiences. The ability to inspire, educate, and connect became one of the most fulfilling aspects of my journey, turning past trauma into a source of insight and advocacy. Recognition, both within professional circles and from broader audiences, affirmed the value of perseverance, discipline, and authenticity, highlighting that empowerment is both personal and relational, impacting oneself and others simultaneously. Critical to this process was embracing leadership and decision-making with confidence. I took ownership of projects, delegated responsibilities strategically, and exercised judgment rooted in experience, ethics, and foresight. Mistakes were approached as opportunities for learning rather than failures, reinforcing resilience and fostering innovation. I also prioritized mentoring others, offering guidance and support to those navigating challenges similar to those I had endured. This reciprocity reinforced my sense of purpose and strengthened my professional and personal legacy. Beyond career and finances, I maintained a focus on holistic well-being. Physical health, mental clarity, and emotional stability became priorities, supporting sustainable performance and reducing vulnerability to stress or burnout. Practices such as mindfulness, exercise, and creative expression integrated seamlessly with professional endeavors, ensuring that growth was balanced, intentional, and nourishing. I understood that true mastery was inseparable from self-care, reflection, and a harmonious integration of all aspects of life. Over time, these combined efforts culminated in measurable success and profound satisfaction. I reached key professional milestones, gained recognition for my work, and cultivated financial independence. Equally important, I felt an enduring sense of agency and confidence, an unshakable awareness that my achievements were earned through resilience, strategic effort, and self-belief rather than the approval or manipulation of others. This realization marked the climax of my empowerment journey, the moment when past trauma no longer dictated the future, and my identity, purpose, and potential were fully realized. Ultimately, the journey reinforced a holistic definition of empowerment. It is not merely survival, success, or recognition, but a synergistic combination of emotional maturity, strategic action, and intentional relationships. Mastery over one's craft, financial independence, and social autonomy converge with self-awareness, emotional resilience, and purposeful living to create a life of fulfillment, freedom, and impact. In achieving these outcomes, I not only reclaimed what was once stolen from me, but also transcended limitations, establishing a foundation for continued growth and meaningful contribution to the world. As I reflect on the long and arduous journey that has defined my life, I am struck by the depth of transformation that has occurred, not merely externally, but within the very core of who I am. The years of manipulation, control, and emotional turmoil orchestrated by Vera and Dexter, once a source of fear and despair, have become the crucible through which I was forged into a resilient, self-aware, and purposeful individual. The scars I bear are not marks of weakness, but emblems of survival, endurance, and unwavering determination. They serve as constant reminders of the strength I discovered within myself, a strength that could not be extinguished by deceit, intimidation, or neglect. I have come to understand that life's adversities, no matter how overwhelming, are not permanent chains but opportunities for growth and mastery. Each obstacle I faced, the silent torment of emotional abuse, the subtle sabotage of my ambitions, the relentless undermining of my self-confidence, was a lesson in vigilance, patience, and strategic resilience. By confronting these challenges with intentionality, I learned to assert boundaries, recognize toxic patterns, and reclaim control over my personal narrative. This realization has not only restored my sense of agency, but has instilled a profound sense of purpose, to live authentically, courageously, and with unwavering integrity. Legacy, I have come to realize, is not measured solely by achievements or accolades, but by the impact one leaves on the lives of others. I now strive to ensure that my journey, marked by struggle, discovery, and triumph, serves as both inspiration and guidance. Through mentorship, storytelling, and advocacy, I aim to empower those navigating similar hardships, providing them with the tools, confidence, and insight necessary to overcome manipulation and reclaim their lives. Sharing my experiences transforms personal pain into collective empowerment, allowing my story to resonate far beyond my own circumstances. In cultivating this legacy, I have embraced the importance of authenticity. The life I lead today is unapologetically mine, shaped by my values, choices, and aspirations rather than the expectations or manipulations of others. I honor my emotions, validate my experiences, and pursue ambitions that align with my deepest convictions. This authenticity is not static, it evolves with reflection, learning, and intentional growth, allowing me to adapt without compromising core principles. It is a guiding philosophy, ensuring that every action, decision, and endeavor reflects the essence of who I am and the life I wish to cultivate. Equally important is the recognition of interconnectedness, the understanding that personal empowerment is amplified when shared and reciprocated. I have invested in relationships that uplift, challenge, and inspire me, recognizing that collective strength enhances individual resilience. Whether through professional collaboration, mentorship, or emotional support networks, these connections enrich life with trust, empathy, and shared purpose. They reinforce the principle that while independence is vital, meaningful impact is often achieved through thoughtful engagement with the world around us. Reflection has also illuminated the significance of continuous learning. The trials I endured underscored that knowledge, adaptability, and self-awareness are indispensable tools for navigating life's uncertainties. I actively seek new perspectives, skills, and experiences, not merely to advance professionally, but to deepen understanding, refine judgment, and enhance the capacity to influence positive change. This commitment to lifelong learning ensures that empowerment remains dynamic, evolving alongside challenges, opportunities, and personal growth. In terms of personal philosophy, I have embraced resilience, courage, and intentionality as central tenets. Resilience allows me to endure setbacks without losing momentum. Courage enables me to face fear, confrontation, and uncertainty with steadfastness. Intentionality ensures that every choice aligns with long-term vision and values. Together, these principles create a framework for navigating life with confidence, clarity, and purpose, transforming past trauma into a roadmap for sustainable fulfillment and meaningful contribution. Ultimately, the journey has led to a profound sense of peace. I no longer carry the weight of resentment, fear, or self-doubt. Instead, I am guided by clarity, self-respect, and an unwavering commitment to live fully and authentically. The lessons of the past inform but do not constrain me, empowering me to pursue aspirations with courage, creativity, and strategic wisdom. I embrace challenges as opportunities, relationships as avenues for mutual growth, and each day as a chance to live intentionally. As I close this chapter of my story, I am filled with gratitude for the hardships that forged resilience, for the victories that affirmed strength, and for the opportunities that lie ahead. I am committed to building a life that reflects both the lessons learned and the potential yet to be realized. My past will always be part of my narrative, but it no longer dictates my destiny. Through reflection, empowerment, and purpose, I have reclaimed not only my life but also my voice, my agency, and my future. In this ultimate reflection, I recognize that empowerment is not a destination but a continuous journey, a practice of resilience, authenticity, and intentional action. By embracing this philosophy, I transform each moment, challenge, and opportunity into a testament to the human spirit's capacity for renewal, growth, and transcendence. The story I have lived, though marked by hardship, is ultimately one of triumph, a declaration that strength, clarity, and purpose can emerge from even the darkest trials, illuminating the path for oneself and others alike.